welcome back to Tyrants on the Field. As always, I'm your host, Joe. And we have brand new Steamroller from Privateer Press, which is absolutely excellent. In that we have it, and that they have provided a slight update today. Travis just posted it on the Facebook here and also on the Discord. So let's dive into it. For those that don't know, Steamroller is the competitive packet that Privateer Press has put out for the last decade or so, and it's actually started by a guy named Hacksaw a billion years ago in the long back as a way to balance out tournament play. Privateer Press absorbed it into their ecosystem and have been updating it since. And this is our first official Steamroller packet for specifically developed for Mark IV. We did have Steamroller 2022 prior to this in 2023, but those were essentially the same packets. It was a packet developed under Mark IV that had been in use for about 4 years under Mark IV, and it was definitely showing its age. Still very good scenarios overall, but very excited for the fresh and new ideas presented in Steamroller 2024's preview packet. So let's jump into it. A couple of big things to get out of the way. If you are used to previous Steamroller, the large rectangular and large circular zones are gone. They're not being utilized as part of the packet. They are moving to a more objective-based terrain, and with that comes some interesting new elements. So the new elements are objectives, objective terrain, flags, and caches. One big huge change for everybody involved is that scenario elements are no longer models. They are not models in any sense, and so that does quite a few different things. One, your electro leaps, your AOE's no longer will be absorbed into those items. So something to consider first off. Additionally, these scenario elements may move during play as part of the scenario. They don't always do it, but it is something that can occur. So let's get into the different types and sort of what they do and how they work. So let's talk about objectives, because these are radically different than you would know objectives as. So objectives here are represented on the tabletop by either a 30, 40, or 50 millimeter base. Objectives are not models. They do not block line of sight. Models can advance through an objective if it has enough movement to completely move past it. If a scenario calls for the objective to move, the objective ignores models and terrain when moving, as long as it has enough movement to completely past any model or obstruction that would prevent its final placement. So a couple of very important points here. If the scenario does allow it to move, you do have the potential to body block it. Because it must have enough movement to get past your base completely. So a little bit of a tactical piece there to consider as we move into this packet. For a 50 millimeter objective, to secure it, i.e. score it, you must have one or more leader models, cohort model, or a battle engine within 3 inches of the objective, and no opponent contesting it. Meaning no singular model of your opponent is within 3 inches. Inert Warjacks and Wild Warbeasts cannot secure. A player secures a 40 millimeter objective if they own one or more leader models or units within 3 inches of it, and no opponent can test it. For a unit to control the objective, all models in the unit still in play must be within the same 3-inch zone, 3 inches of the same objective. A player secures a 30 millimeter objective if they own one or more leader models, or if they have one or more leader models or solo models within 3 of the objective, and no opponent is contesting it. An An objective is contested if one or more of your opponent's models is within 3 inches of the objective. Leader models, inert warjacks, and wild boar beasts cannot contest. Flags and objective terrain. Some terrain on the tabletop can also serve as an objective in some scenarios. If a scenario has a flag marked before deployment, starting with player 1, choose a piece of terrain within 5 inches of the 20mm flag, place the flag on it, on, in, or next to the piece of terrain to represent that it is now an objective piece of terrain. A player cannot choose a hazard to be an objective piece of terrain. If no valid terrain pieces exist, leave the flag at the location specified in the scenario. The flag is no longer a token and becomes an obstruction objective terrain piece. If an objective terrain piece is destroyed, expires, or is removed from play, before removing the terrain piece, the player must destroy the terrain. The player that destroyed the terrain piece places its flag anywhere outside its edge. Then remove the terrain from play. The flag then becomes an obstruction objective terrain piece. A player secures a piece of objective terrain by having 2 or more models within the area of the terrain or within 2 inches of the piece of terrain, and no opponent contested it. A piece of objective terrain is contested if one or more of your opponent's models is within area terrain or within 2 inches of the piece of terrain. Leader models, inert warjacks, and wild boar beast cannot contest. So, couple of bits here. One is a bit of clarification that was provided by Lauren on the community forum in regards to this that is not reflected in the wording. When you select your terrain piece, you may only select flags you control, or flags that you own. Meaning at the start of the turn, the flags that are closest to your deployment zone are the ones that you may pick which terrain piece is utilized, if there is an eligible piece. So that is one bit to consider in the selection of side. So these are interesting. The whole terrain feature that is selected becomes effectively the area zone, and then within 2 inches of that is where you may score it from or contest. And scoring just requires 2 of any model, two of any models that you own, to be within 2 inches of that terrain piece or within the terrain piece. And leader models, inert warjack models, and wild boar beast models cannot contest. And you just need 1 model of yours within 2 inches of the terrain or within it to contest. Caches. Caches are very interesting. Caches are not models. Caches do not block line of sight, and models can advance through a cache if they have enough movement to move completely past it. You can only score off your opponent's cache. To score a cache, you must have a friendly model forfeit its combat action while in base contact with your opponent's cache. When you score a cache, immediately remove it from play. So caches are interesting. You only ever score on those that are owned by your opponent. It requires you to be in base to base and requires the model in base to base to be able to forfeit its combat action to then remove it and immediately score. Killbox. Some scenarios include the killbox rules as indicated on the scenario special rules. Killbox, starting on the first player's second turn, if a player ends their turn with a friendly leader model completely within 12 inches of their table edge, the opponent immediately scores 2 victory points. Assassination victory. When only one player has the only leader model remaining in play, that player immediately wins the game. Even though the game is over, players score 1 last victory points based on the final game state. This scenario does not change game results, cannot lead to scenario victory, even if you end within 3 points more than your opponent after your assassination victory, but it does affect the scoring of the game. If all leader models are simultaneously destroyed, the game ends. Victory is determined using tiebreakers. Additionally, count and report army points destroyed in accordance with the 3rd tiebreaker. Scenario victory. When a player has fulfilled the victory conditions described in the scenario, that player immediately wins the game. Additionally, count and report the total number of all models destroyed by each player in accordance with the second tiebreak. So first scenario is Recon 4. Let's talk about the special rules, particularly victory condition, because this is the victory condition across the board. In this one, the kill box scenario uses the kill box special rule as described above. Scenario victory. A player who has 3 or more victory points more than their opponent after scoring on their opponent's turn immediately wins. What does that mean? That means you cannot win on your turn. You have to win on your opponent's turn, and you only win by having 3 or more differential than your opponent does at the end of your opponent's scoring turn. So you always get a rebuttal. So that is a pretty big change from the 5-0 scenarios that you could have gotten into in previous editions. Pretty big deal. All right, so this one has you mark 2 flags, 2 20mm flags, which become terrain objectives, 2 30mm objectives, which are scored by solos, and 2 20mm caches in accordance with the diagram below, starting on the second player's second turn. At the end of each player's turn, a player earns victory points as follows. If you secure a 30mm objective or terrain objective, you score 1 victory point. If you capture the cache, you score 1 victory point. There is no limit to the number of victory points a player can score. Game length. The game ends at the end of the second player's 7th turn. One other note when setting all of these up, you measure to the edge of the base that you're setting up. So a little bit of a change to how we used to work off center. Now for ease, we're just measuring to the edge of the element. So the first one, pretty straightforward scenario. Nothing moves. You're going to have 1 terrain element. You're going to have 1 30mm objective that is going to be scored by solos or leaders. And you've got a cache. The elements are kind of clustered toward the center. Then you have battle lines. Battle lines adds an additional element, which is you have 4 objectives on the table. You have 2 40mm objectives and 2 30mm objectives, and you got a flag for each side. It becomes a terrain objective. At the end of each player's turn, you must choose 1 player's objective, or you must choose to move 1 of any player's objectives 3 inches toward their opponent's table edge. You may not choose the same objective your opponents chose on the previous scoring turn. There is no limit to the number of victory points a player can score. So here you kind of have an interesting bit of movement on the terrain element, where you're going to be able to manipulate the battlefield slightly every turn that is scoring. So from second player's second turn, you will begin to see that these objectives move, and that will change the battlefield slightly. Now, they move 3 inches toward the opponent's table edge. It's towards, not directly towards. That's intentional. So you can do with that what you will. And then our final scenario is Wolves at Our Heels, which has an additional bit, which is the Wolves Advance, starting on the first player's third turn. Extend the kill box by 2 inches at the beginning of each of the first player's turns. So you have a collapsing kill box in this scenario, starting on turn 3. So if you're a run and hide caster, you're gonna be in trouble in this scenario. You've got to make sure that you know that you've got to continue to move your caster outside of the collapsing kill box. Again, you have to outscore your opponent by 3 on your opponent's turn. This one has two 50mm objectives, two 40mm objectives, and two 20mm caches. In accordance with the diagram below, player earns victory points as follows: one for the zone secure, one for the cache captured. If a player's 40mm objector is closer to their opponent's edge, then their opponent's 40mm objector is from the player's board edge at the end of the player's second player's fourth turn. It gets you 3 victory points. No points if tied. At the end of a scoring turn, when a player controls either player's 40mm objective after scoring victory points that turn, they must move that objective 3 inches toward the opponent's board edge. There is no limit to the number of victory points a player can score, and the game ends on the second player's 7th turn. So this is a very interesting, complex scenario that is all about the risk reward of getting your objective as far down the field as you can safely, so that you can take advantage of the big score jump on turn 4. And you have a collapsing kill box. So this is a very interesting scenario in that regard. So what does all this mean in New Steamroller? One, there's a lot of Mark IV ideas in here. And I mean that in the most positive sense. You are trying to add more dynamicism to the game by having living, breathing scenarios, in that the scenario positioning changes. The staticness of a zone is no longer there in some of these ones. I mean, in fact, we have 3 scenarios. In 2 of the scenarios, elements move at a given pace. So it's continually forcing you to adapt on the field, forcing you to think differently. Additionally, we maintain sort of our traditional concept of a zone, reimagined as these objectives, because the objectives have different scoring types based on their size, and means we need to have good force balance to be able to score in a majority of these. Additionally, we're looking at a packet that is going to score a little bit slower than we're used to. We're going to have an ability to react to our opponent and not be able to run away in a single turn on scenario. It will still occur, but our opponent's going to get a snap back on it. And so I do think you're going to see a pretty significant amount of games sort of go attritionally heavy. I think attrition is going to be huge in this Steamroller. Not that it isn't always, but very much it's about killing off the elements that you can, not overstretching on scenario, and then only committing fully to scenario when you have the attritional advantage, at which point the opponent is unlikely to be able to outscore you or to score in a manner that stops your inevitability. You're going to need to be hyper-focused on keeping your caster alive, and you're going to need to be hyper-focused on opportunities to eliminate the enemy caster. I think assassination is going to be huge in this packet throughout the entirety of its life, because it pretty much is dictating that one player's main out is going to be assassination if they want an actual resolution within the game. So I think it's a super interesting packet. I look forward to seeing what people think of it fully. We've had it for a couple of weeks now. we finally just have a nice PDF from Privateer Press on it, and I look forward to seeing what people think. We got a really lively discussion going in the Discord for Steamroller 2024, and yeah, give it a try. Love to hear what you think in the comments, and we'll talk to you on the next one.